On January 21, 2026, a quiet announcement from the Swedish royal court marked the end of an era. Princess Désirée, Baroness Silversköld, the third sister of King Carl XVI Gustaf, passed away at her home in Coburg Castle. She was 87. For those of us who follow royal history, her passing feels like the turning of a significant page. She was a member of a unique sorority known to the Swedish public simply as Haga, the Haga princesses. To understand Désirée, and to understand the woman who would later wear some of Sweden's most formidable Napoleonic heirlooms with such understated grace, we have to look back at the world that shaped her. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. Born in 1938, Désirée grew up at Haga Palace, just outside Stockholm. In the 1940s, she and her sisters, Margareta, Birgitta, and Christina, along with their younger brother, the current king, were national icons. They occupied a space in the public imagination similar to child stars. In a Europe darkened by the Second World War, photos of the four little girls in their white dresses offered a necessary brightness. Life at Haga appears in the archives as a bucolic idyll. The children were raised under the watchful eye of their beloved nursemaid, Ingrid Nena Bjornberg. Nena's memoirs give us the most intimate glimpse into Désirée's character. She described the young princess as, like the fairy tale itself, a child who was dreamy, artistic, and full of wonder. The sisters spent their days surrounded by nature. There were ducks to feed, goats to tend, and a family pony named Eva, a gift from their great-grandfather, King Gustaf V. It sounds charming, yet the reality of the war infringed even upon the palace grounds. Princess Birgitta later recalled how the family adhered to strict rationing. They limited their butter consumption and dutifully blacked out the windows at night to comply with air raid precautions. Her father, Prince Gustav Adolf, insisted that the royal family share the burdens of the people, refusing special privileges while others sacrificed. This balance of royal privilege and wartime austerity defined Désirée's early years. She was the quiet one, often observed standing slightly apart, lost in her own thoughts. But that childhood tranquility shattered abruptly when Désirée was only 8 years old. On the afternoon of January 26, 1947, Prince Gustav Adolf was returning home from a hunting trip in the Netherlands. He had boarded a KLM flight at Kastrup Airport in Copenhagen. Seated next to him was the celebrated American opera singer Grace Moore. The plane taxied, took off, and climbed only about 50 meters before it stalled and plummeted to the ground. There were no survivors. The crash changed the course of Swedish history instantly. Désirée's brother, Carl Gustaf, became second in line to the throne at the age of 9 months. Princess Sibylla was left a widow with 5 young children. The family left their beloved Haga Palace and moved to the Royal Palace in Stockholm, a transition from a warm country home to a formal, vast residence in the city center. Désirée navigated this grief with a characteristic quietness. As she grew older, she carved out a path that prioritized practical service over royal glamour. She attended the French school in Stockholm and later studied at a finishing school in Switzerland, but her true interests lay elsewhere. In 1958, she began training in infant care. She went on to graduate as a preschool teacher from the Social Pedagogical Seminary in 1960. It is fascinating to look at the photos from this period. We see a princess of Sweden, the granddaughter of a king, completing internships at the Kungsklippen Playhouse and the Crown Princess Lovisa Children's Hospital. She even worked at the Tomteboda Institute for the Blind. Her principal at the seminary noted her specific talent. She possessed a genuine ability to inspire children in their games and was deeply empathetic. This was a woman who found fulfillment in direct human connection rather than in the abstract duties of representation. This grounded nature explains so much about her later choices. She could have led the life of a socialite princess, hopping between galas in Paris and London. Instead, she taught children. She valued utility and simplicity. The path to Désirée's wedding day was marked by both deep sorrow and eventual joy. Before she found her life partner, the princess experienced a tragedy that echoed the loss of her father. Her first great love was Count Gregor Lowenhaupt, a close friend of the family. Their future together seemed certain, a matter of when, not if. But in 1960, Gregor died in a skiing accident in Ore at the age of 22. For a young woman who had already lost a father, this was a devastating blow. Friends eventually reintroduced light into her life when they arranged a meeting with Baron Nicholas Silverschold, an aristocrat and landowner. The match was a happy one, but it came with significant constitutional consequences. In the 1960s, Swedish succession laws were rigid. By marrying a man of noble but not royal birth, Désirée had to forfeit her status as Her Royal Highness and her place in the line of succession. She became Princess Désirée, Baroness Silverschold. For a woman who valued privacy, this loss of royal rank seems to have been a relief rather than a punishment. She later stated that she saw herself primarily as a mother and wife, placing little importance on her princess title. This attitude manifested perfectly in the days leading up to her wedding. When her grandfather, King Gustav VI Adolf, asked her what she wished for as a wedding gift, the court likely anticipated a request for something suitable for a baroness, perhaps a parure or a silver service. Désirée's response remains one of the most charming anecdotes in the royal archives. She told the king, "I do not want any jewelry. I want a tractor. Nicholas needs one for the farm." It is a striking image. The princess preparing to leave the royal palace for a life in the country, prioritizing agricultural machinery over diamonds. Yet, on June 5, 1964, when she walked down the aisle of Stockholm Cathedral, the contrast between her practical nature and her imperial heritage was on full display. Désirée chose to wear the cameo tiara. This diadem is unique in the Swedish collection. It contains no diamonds. Instead, it features cameo carvings set in red gold and surrounded by seed pearls. It is a piece of pure history, commissioned by Napoleon Bonaparte for Empress Josephine in 1809. It depicts scenes from Greek mythology, focusing on Cupid and Psyche, a narrative of love overcoming obstacles. By choosing this piece, Désirée helped cement a modern Swedish tradition. Her sister, Princess Birgitta, had worn it for her own wedding 3 years prior. Désirée's choice confirmed its status as the family's bridal crown. It is a tradition that continues to this day. Queen Sylvia famously wore it at her wedding in 1976, noting that wearing the same tiara as her sisters-in-law felt like a good omen. Crown Princess Victoria followed suit in 2010. Seeing Désirée in the cameo tiara offers a fascinating visual. The heavy, historic gold crown sits atop the head of a woman who simply wanted a tractor. It highlights the duality of her life, a deep respect for her family's history, coupled with a total lack of pretension. The cameo parure, however, belongs to the monarch's collection. Once the wedding waltzes ended, the tiara returned to the royal vaults. But the family did not send their granddaughter away with only a tractor. While the king granted her wish for farm equipment, it was her step-grandmother, Queen Louise, who ensured she had a diadem of her own. While the cameos went back to the vault, another piece, delicate, diamond set, and deeply sentimental, became her personal property. And unlike the state jewels, the fate of this specific tiara is now a matter of great interest to royal watchers. Its history begins with Queen Louise, the step-grandmother who helped raise the Haga princesses after their father's death. This petite, intricate bandeau was likely a wedding gift to Louise in 1923 from her brother, Lord Louis Mountbatten, and his wife, Edwina. It is a quintessential piece of 1920s design, low-profile, delicate, and intended to be worn across the forehead in the fashion of the flappers. For decades, this tiara served as a starter piece for the Swedish royal women. In the 1950s, the vault doors opened for the 4 Haga sisters, and they all took turns wearing it. It was a communal jewel, a shared resource for young princesses beginning their public lives. We see photographs of Princess Margaretha wearing it, then Princess Birgitta. Désirée, however, seemed to have a special affinity for it. She selected it for the Nobel Prize ceremony in 1963, wearing it with the confidence of a young woman who had found her look. She packed it in her luggage for the grand ball at Windsor Castle, celebrating the wedding of Princess Alexandra of Kent that same year. When Désirée married Baron Silvershold, Queen Louise made a decisive gesture. She stopped the rotation. The tiara that had been shared by all four sisters was gifted exclusively to Désirée. It ceased to be alone and became her property. For the next half-century, this scroll tiara was Désirée's faithful companion. While other royal ladies experimented with towering diadems or colored stones, Désirée remained loyal to her wedding gift. It became her workhorse jewel. We saw it glinting in her hair at her sister Christina's wedding in 1974. She wore it to state banquets throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Even as recently as 2007, she chose it for King Harald of Norway's 70th birthday celebrations. Now, we face the inevitable question of inheritance. Will this delicate scroll tiara quietly disappear into the private vaults of the nobility? That is often the fate of these personal treasures. However, there is a hopeful precedent within the family. Désirée's eldest sister, Princess Margaretha, chose a different path for her personal aquamarine kokoshnik. Instead of keeping it hidden away, she made it available to the main royal line. Thanks to that generous decision, we have been treated to the sight of those spectacular aquamarines on both Crown Princess Victoria and Princess Madeleine. It remains to be seen if Désirée has made a similar arrangement for her diamond scroll tiara, allowing it to remain in the royal rotation, or if it will stay exclusively with the Silverschild family. What do you think? Will we see it return to the royal palace? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But while the scroll tiara was her signature piece, it was far from the only treasure in the Baroness's jewelry box. Some jewels remain mysterious, others misunderstood, and all deserve a closer look. Even more frequently worn than the scroll tiara was another piece that became almost inseparable from her image. If you browse through the photographs of her life, this jewel appears again and again. This is a classic diamond riviere, a river of stones. It is elegant, thin, and understated. Unlike the grand, heavy necklaces in the Bernadotte Foundation that cover the décolletage, this piece was designed for versatility. The press at the time noted that Désirée did not actually own a diamond necklace of her own. The report suggested she was likely borrowing the piece from her mother, Princess Sibylla, or her step-grandmother, Queen Louise. This adds a layer of complexity to what we see in later years. As Désirée matured, the necklace she wore appeared to change. The piece seen in her later gala appearances features a more distinct graduation, with larger central stones compared to the delicate line of diamonds she wore as a debutante. Did she eventually inherit the necklace? Or did she acquire a different, more substantial riviere later in life? Diamond rivieres are notoriously difficult to distinguish from one another in photographs. We may never know for sure if she owned it or continued the family tradition of borrowing, but one thing is certain, that line of diamonds became an inseparable part of her gala silhouette. But if the necklace was a quiet classic from her early years, the earrings she favored in her later life told a very different, bolder story. If you look at the major family gatherings of the last 2 decades, you will notice she almost rarely appears without this specific pair. They are striking in their geometry. A large rectangular cut stone at the earlobe, suspending a substantial circular drop surrounded by a halo of smaller stones. She chose these earrings for the most significant, high-profile events of the Swedish court. She wore them to the wedding of her goddaughter, Crown Princess Victoria, in 2010. She wore them again for Princess Madeleine's wedding in 2013, and once more for Prince Carl Philip's nuptials in 2015. When the family gathered for King Carl XVI Gustaf's 70th birthday celebrations in 2016, these earrings were once again framing her face. The sheer scale of these stones naturally invites curiosity. Given that they appeared later in her life, some observers wonder if they might be high-quality rock crystal or white topaz, stones often used by aristocratic women to create a visual impact without the security concerns of empire-sized diamonds. We do not know their composition for certain, but what is clear is that Désirée loved them. They provided the perfect modern counterweight to the antique tiaras she wore, proving that even in her 70s and 80s, the princess had a keen eye for a bold, majestic look. Finally, there is one last piece in her private collection that requires a very sharp eye. It is this classic cluster brooch, a central red stone surrounded by a halo of diamonds. From about the early 1990s, Désirée began appearing with this brooch frequently, pinning it to her sash or the neckline of her gown, and it remained a staple in her later years. At first glance, this brooch is easily mistaken for two other famous pieces in the Swedish vaults. First, look at it next to the brooch from the Russian pink topaz parure. At a glance, the layout is similar, but the difference is in the stone itself. The pink topaz is larger, much clearer, and lighter in color, a true transparent pink. Désirée's brooch features a stone that is smaller, darker, and more saturated, clearly a ruby. Then there is the second suspect, the diamond and ruby brooch that belongs to the King's Foundation. We see this often on Queen Sylvia and Crown Princess Victoria. We know from King Gustav V's 1950 will that this foundation brooch is described as oblong. And if you look closely at Queen Sylvia wearing it, you see that rectangular, cushion-like shape. Now, look back at Désirée. Her brooch is distinctly oval. The metalwork between the central stone and the diamond rim is also different, more delicate, less heavy than the foundation piece. It is a unique, personal jewel, likely another gift from her parents or grandparents in her youth that belongs solely to her. There is one final private treasure that dates back to the very beginning of Désirée's public life. It is this Art Deco bar brooch, featuring a geometric diamond design centered by a sapphire. The provenance of this piece is clear. In this archival portrait, we see her mother, Princess Sibylla, wearing the exact same brooch. Désirée began wearing it very early in her royal duties, typically pinning it to the sash of the Order of the Seraphim. To the best of my knowledge, this brooch does not appear in any known images of Queen Sylvia or her sisters. To me, this exclusion suggests that, unlike the shared jewels of the Bernadotte Foundation, this piece was a specific personal inheritance from her mother, a private keepsake that became hers alone. But a baroness is still a Bernadotte, and when the family gathered for state occasions, Désirée had access to the heavy artillery, the historic pieces belonging to the King's Foundation. The first of these is a piece that defies the rules of royal glamour. It has no diamonds. It has no sapphires. It is the Napoleonic cut-steel tiara. This piece is a marvel of engineering from the era of Queen Hortense. It relies entirely on highly polished steel studs set in gold to catch the light. For a long time it was forgotten, collecting dust in a cupboard until the historian Goran Alm rediscovered it. Désirée chose this specific tiara for the weddings of the next generation, Princess Madeleine in 2013 and Prince Carl Philip in 2015. To me, there is something poetic about this choice. The tiara is made of steel, a material that is far stronger than it looks. It feels like a fitting metaphor for Désirée herself, a woman who appeared fragile in her later years, yet possessed the quiet, unbreakable strength to walk her own path. But the heavy artillery didn't stop with steel. There were moments when Désirée wore the defining diamond crown of the dynasty, the Baden fringe tiara. This towering wall of diamond spikes is usually associated with the crown princesses of Sweden. Victoria wears it today, as did Queen Victoria and Queen Louise before her. Yet, seeing Désirée wear it reminds us of her rank. Even without a royal title, she was the king's sister, and she carried this immense diamond sunray with effortless grace. She also dipped into the Russian collection. We spoke earlier about her private ruby brooch and how it resembles the Russian pink topaz parure. Well, she wore the real thing too. She donned the grand pink topaz necklace and brooch for major state occasions, such as King Carl Gustav's 50th birthday in 1996. Then there is the matter of color. For the most important family event of the decade, the wedding of her goddaughter, Crown Princess Victoria, in 2010, Désirée reached for the Napoleonic amethyst parure. This set has a heavy history. It began as a necklace for Empress Josephine, and it was Queen Sylvia who famously mounted it onto a frame to create a tiara. Désirée wore it with the same upright dignity as the Queen, reminding everyone that despite her private life, she was born a Bernadotte. But we cannot talk about the royal loans without mentioning a piece from the very beginning of her story. Before she settled on her personal diamond scroll tiara, the young Désirée often wore a jewel that has become somewhat legendary among royal watchers, the aquamarine bandeau. Known affectionately as the Cyclops because of its single, massive central stone, this tiara was a staple for the Haga princesses in the 1960s. Désirée wore it to Nobel ceremonies and galas in her youth. It is a simple, geometric piece, and today we associate it almost exclusively with Princess Madeleine. But looking back at photos of Désirée wearing it in her 20s, we are reminded of that glittering era when the four sisters were the young stars of the Swedish court, sharing jewels and gowns before life took them in separate directions. There is one more tiara in the royal loans category that Désirée wore during her most active years, and it is perhaps one of the most curious pieces in the Swedish collection. It is the 4-button tiara. At first glance, this simple band with 4 diamond rosettes looks modest, almost modern, but the buttons themselves are ancient. Some historians believe they date back to King Carl XIV Johan and may have even adorned his uniform. Others trace them back even further to the 18th century Queen Louisa Ulrika, suggesting they are among the oldest jewels the family possesses. While its origins are debated, its use is not. In the 1950s and 60s, this tiara was a staple for the Haga princesses. It was the perfect starter tiara, light, elegant, and easy to wear. Désirée wore it to Nobel ceremonies in the early 1960s, joining her sisters in giving these historic diamond buttons a new lease on life. Finally, there is one tiara Désirée wore that you will not find in the Swedish vaults today. In fact, if you follow royal news, you might recognize it as a piece currently worn by the Danish royal family. It is the turquoise daisy bandeau. We recently saw this delicate piece make headlines when it was worn by young Princess Isabella of Denmark for her 18th birthday portraits. So, how did a Swedish princess like Désirée come to wear it decades earlier? The answer lies in the family connection. This tiara originally belonged to Désirée's grandmother, Margaret of Connaught. It was inherited by her daughter, Queen Ingrid of Denmark. And while not worn by her, the turquoise daisy bandeau was often loaned to relatives, including her niece, Princess Désirée of Sweden. Princess Désirée left this world just as she lived in it, quietly in her beloved home at Coburg Castle. Years ago, she summed up her life with a simple sentiment that feels like a benediction today. She said, "I'm lucky. I'm really grateful that I'm healthy. And then there's the joy in the children and grandchildren. I love my grandchildren, and I think they like their grandmother too." It is particularly poignant that Princess Désirée left us just months before a major family milestone. This April, King Carl XVI Gustaf turns 80. The court has already announced a Te Deum service and a grand gala dinner to celebrate the monarch. Of course, the era of the Haga princesses appearing together had already begun to fade. With the passing of Princess Birgitta in late 2024, and Désirée's own long struggle with health, it was unlikely she would have been able to attend these coming festivities in person. Yet, her departure now, so close to the King's Jubilee, marks a final, quiet bowing out. As the family gathers for that gala, the great dynastic jewels, the amethysts, the cut steel, will undoubtedly continue their rotation, shining on the next generation of Bernadotte women. But the fate of Désirée's personal collection is the true mystery now. What becomes of the diamond scroll tiara or that exquisite ruby brooch? Will they remain with the Baron and Baroness's Silvershold, kept as private memories of their mother at Coburg? Or did Désirée, perhaps, decide to bequeath the scroll tiara back to the main royal line to ensure it remains part of the court's history? We simply do not know yet. We will have to watch future gala appearances very closely to find the answer. Ultimately, Désirée was a woman born into a fairy tale who found her happy ending in reality. She was a princess who could have chosen a life defined by the cold brilliance of prestige. Instead, she chose the warmth of a hearth, the laughter of grandchildren, and a tractor. And in that choice lay her true nobility. If this story of the quiet Haga princess touched you, please leave a like. It is a small way to honor the memory of a remarkable woman. And please subscribe so you don't miss our next journey into the world's most fascinating royal jewelry boxes. Thank you for spending this time with me. Goodbye.